Hello, it's nice to be with you again. This week we're going to talk about budgerigars. We have here two very pretty little birds, one green one and one blue one. When you're first thinking about buying a budgerigar, you've got to decide what you're going to do. Whether you'd like to have a budgie that's going to be tame and sit on your finger and talk, or if you'd like to keep two and possibly someday breed from them. So if you decide that you want one that's going to be very tame, then the best thing is to buy a very young one. Really not more than 6 weeks old, because once they get older than 6 weeks, they start to get a bit too wild for training to sit on your finger. So go to a place where you're sure that they've got a good stock and they will sell you one that's a suitable age. It doesn't matter whether you get a male or a female budgerigar, you can teach them both to talk, but if you want to be able to tell the difference, I'm afraid you'll have to wait until they're quite a bit older. You see here we've got two, one's a green one and one's a grey-blue one. The green one, that's the male bird, and the blue one's the female. Now how we can tell this is because just above his beak he's got a little blue spot. It's a line, and that's bright blue in the male, and in the female bird it's brown. But as I say, they've got to be quite a bit older than 6 weeks before you can tell about that. And of course, a very important thing when you're buying a bird is to buy the best possible cage you can afford, and best usually means the biggest. Look, this is quite a pretty cage here with the birds in, but I much prefer this one that I've got here. It's a lovely big cage, and not only is it quite big when it's closed, which is in this position, but when it's open, it's smashing because the bird can fly in and out. Once it gets used to your home and you allow it out to fly around, it can find its own way back really easily. Inside the cage you'll get the usual kinds of perches, which is this sort, very smooth kind, and I like to take some of those out and put in real tree branches, and that way the bird can exercise its feet and its beak by tearing off the bark, and it keeps it a lot healthier. I don't like to put lots of toys in the cage. You see cages with all these plastic nodding things in, and I really don't think the budgerigar likes them at all. After all, it doesn't really know what they're supposed to be. So the only thing I would put into the cage, apart from the natural things, is perhaps a mirror so that he can see himself and talk to himself, and he'll chatter away for hours and hours. On the bottom of the cage you have a choice of things to put. You can either put sand, which is here just ordinary bird sand, but if you've got the cage indoors this can be quite messy, so I think the best thing is a ready-made sand sheet, and you can get them in different sizes to suit a particular type of cage. Food, of course, is extremely important, and as with all birds, as big a variety as possible, as many different kinds of food as you can think, apart from the standard budgerigar seed, which we've got here, which is a mixture that you buy ready-made up in the shops. They love millet spray. That's one of their very, very favourite things, and they'll spend ages stripping that, all the little seeds off and eating it all. They make quite a mess, but they really do enjoy it. Grit is very, very important. It helps them to digest the seed. They take in little pieces of grit and they use that inside to grind up the seed. So grit, even if you give sand and sand sheets, make sure that you supply grit as well. They'll eat quite a lot of it. Another very important thing in the budgerigar's cage is the cuttlefish bone. This is extremely important for making their beaks grow really strong and making their claws on their feet really healthy. Exercise is extremely important, as I said, and you can open the cage and let your bird fly around, but don't do that until your bird's been with you for quite a while and he knows his way around the room, otherwise he could get lost. And if he is flying around the room, don't forget to put things over the windows and over the fire so that he doesn't bang into the glass or disappear up the chimney. Birds like to keep nice and clean, so for this we supply them with a bird bath. This is just a little plastic thing that you clip on the door. This is the small door at this side, and you open it, you put warm water in, not too hot, not too cold, and put it in there, and your bird will drop in and out of the bath and really shake his feathers about and get lovely and clean. It might take him a little while to get used to bathing, so to tempt him it might be wise to spray him with some warm water, just a gentle spray. And you can also buy special aerosol cans of special mist spray that keep the feathers really, really clean. And some liquid to put in the bird bath, like you have a bubble bath when you're having a bath yourself. There are a few illnesses that birds get, but really if you think your bird doesn't look very well, the best thing is to take him straight to the vet. Now you know something about keeping a budgie, let me tell you a story about a budgerigar who lived in a cage with his sister and another budgerigar. His name was Peter and hers was Penny. They belonged to Mr. Brown. Every evening, Mr. Brown used to close the windows and the doors and make sure that the fire guard was in place. Then he would let Peter and Penny out of the cage for a good fly around the room to stretch their wings. Peter and Penny loved this part of the day best of all. They would fly across the room as fast as their wings would carry them and land on the table, the windowsill, the cabinet, or even on Mr. Brown. But Mr. Brown didn't mind a bit. In fact, he loved his little feathered friends so much that he liked them to sit on his shoulder and tweak his ear with their beaks. One day, Peter and Penny were having their usual fly round when Peter suddenly stopped on the windowsill. "Well, I never did," he said to Penny. "I've never noticed that before." "What before?" said Penny. "Why, out there," said Peter. "There's a great big room out there, and it's got all sorts of funny things in it." "Why, yes," said Penny. "It's got all sorts of red cupboards and great big green flowers, bigger than anything I've ever seen before." Of course, she meant the houses and the trees. "And look," said Peter excitedly, "there are some brown budgerigars." I must say, they do look funny, all brown like that. Don't they, Penny? Of course, they weren't budgerigars at all. They were sparrows. But Peter and Penny didn't know that. Well, from that day on, Peter got more and more curious about outside. He gazed and gazed through the window and hoped that one day Mr. Brown would leave the window open just enough for him to hop out. Needless to say, Mr. Brown was far too careful ever to do a thing like that. But alas, his sister came to stay with him, and she wasn't so thoughtful. One day, when Mr. Brown had let Peter and Penny out of their cage, the telephone rang in the hall. Mr. Brown went out to answer it, making sure to close the door behind him. However, whilst he was talking on the phone, his sister came into the sitting room to get her knitting. "Goodness," she said to herself, "it's hot in here. All the windows are closed." And she went over to the window and flung it open. She hadn't even noticed Peter and Penny, who were sitting on top of a picture. Well, of course, the minute she left, Peter said that he was going to fly out through the window and have a good look round. Poor Penny begged him not to go, but Peter was determined, so out he flew. It was lovely outside. At first, Peter flew all over the place. But when he looked round to go home again, he found he didn't know where he was. He couldn't even see Mr. Brown's house anywhere. Worse than that, he began to feel very hungry. Then he saw some crumbs on someone's lawn. A little girl had just put them out for the birds, and all sorts of birds were swooping down to eat them. Peter flew down too, although he felt rather shy and was just going to peck at a crumb when a sparrow looked at him and said, "Hey, who do you think you are? Look, everybody, he's a funny little coloured bird come to steal our crumbs. What are we going to do about it?" "Cheek," said another sparrow. "Why, I know what sort of bird that is," said a thrush. "It's a pet budgerigar. He must have flown out of his cage and escaped." "Well, he can fly right back to his cage," said the sparrow, "instead of coming here to steal our crumbs. Go home, silly bluebird." Just then the little girl came out of the house with her mummy. "Why, Mummy, look! All the birds are making a fuss round that budgerigar," she said. As she got nearer, the birds all flew away, except Peter, who had nowhere to fly to. "Do you think the budgerigar is lost?" asked the little girl. "It looks like it," said her mummy. "Run into the house, dear. Get a nice big cardboard box. We'll make some little holes in the lid so the air can get through, and we'll put him into the box and take him to the police station. I expect his owner will be upset at losing him, so he's sure to make inquiries at the police station." In the meantime, Mr. Brown had found that Peter had disappeared and was very, very upset. "Oh dear," he said to himself, "my poor little bird. I do hope he's all right. I'd better ring the police station and tell them I've lost him." Mr. Brown phoned the police station, and then he looked all the way along the street, but there was no sign of Peter. Just as he got in, the telephone rang, It was the sergeant at the police station to say that Peter had been found. Mr. Brown rushed to see Peter, and as you can imagine, Peter was even happier to see Mr. Brown. Then he got home and into his cage and saw Penny, and she made him promise never ever to go exploring again. But it wasn't a very hard promise to make, because Peter realised that outside is all right for wild birds, but for tame birds it's heaps better to stay at home. That's all for this week. Please join me next week. Bye-bye.